I find that I learn as much by coming to this meeting as I do by talking at this meeting, and this talk is no exception. It is a presentation and some research that I've been doing that is a little bit more oriented towards a general audience than a group of people with narcolepsy. And what I will be interested in hearing when I'm done is just how applicable you think this is to a person with narcolepsy, because oftentimes people with narcolepsy who have excessive sleepiness can sleep just about anywhere, sort of like this picture. Although I don't only want a person to sleep, I want a person to sleep well. And when it comes to a person with narcolepsy, what we're looking for is not just falling asleep, but staying asleep. And as opposed to a person with insomnia, where I think this material matters a lot about falling asleep, my own belief, but you can set me straight, is that for a person with narcolepsy, this matters more for staying asleep, so that you don't, have a night that's very choppy. So I like this picture, not only to make the point that people with narcolepsy can sleep anywhere, but just to show that people do try to sleep under very adverse circumstances. Clearly, this has a story, and I don't know that this was the preferred sleeping spot for this person, but I am going to tell you a story from my time working in the sleep clinic. I saw a individual who came in complaining he did not sleep well, and he probably had more than one problem. He was a night shift worker, so we did his sleep study during the day when he normally slept. And we found that he had obstructive sleep apnea, and we started him on treatment. But his wife came in for the second visit when we talked about the results of the sleep study. And she mentioned something that he did not mention. I don't know if he thought it was just something that couldn't be fixed or something that wasn't worth mentioning, but she explained that they lived in a relatively small house. He would come home from his night shift, sleep during the day, but she also had a job. She ran a daycare in their small house. So not far away from where he was trying to sleep. And shift workers are always challenged to get enough sleep because there's so many other factors against them. He was trying to sleep with all the noise and the predictable chaos of a daycare center. I thought CPAP would help him some, but I wasn't sure that that would completely improve his sleep problem. And I had a couple of ideas. Once I knew the problem, we then could problem solve a bit. For example, maybe he could, look to a friend or to a neighbor and sleep at their house, just to not have to sleep in his own house, given that his wife was self-employed with her daycare business. And that's in fact what he did. But he had somehow thought he just needed to tough it out. It was what it was. And I think that we often need to hold out and have higher standards than that. And so this talk is actually a very sort of practical one about how can we have high standards about our bedroom and help us all sleep as well as possible, whatever our specific circumstances might be. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about something that's very familiar to all of you, but I do think it's important. I just want to make the point that more sleep is better. Well, the right amount of sleep is better. Not too much, not too little. If some of you heard my other talk, I'm sort of on a Goldilocks thing here. We want just the right amount of sleep. And then I want to talk a little bit about how all of our senses can perhaps play a role in helping us, causing sleep problems, but maybe also be part of the solution. So for people who do not sleep well, and this is well known to anyone in narcolepsy, there can be a spectrum of problems. For people with milder sleeping problems, it might just be some inattention. For people with a major problem, it can be true excessive daytime sleepiness, where you find yourself sleeping where you don't want to and when you don't want to. And there are a whole host of other things that can happen. This has been well documented in a couple of different ways using research tools. where we can see that a sleep-deprived person has a different pattern of activity in the brain, particularly in the amygdala, and that this can mean the person is more moody and reactive. And with people who have, this work has mostly been done in experimentally sleep deprived individuals. So, someone who's presumably a healthy, normal sleeper who then is forcefully kept awake, and then these studies are done. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if, for someone whose sleep is very poor because of narcolepsy, they sleep during the day, of course, but they don't sleep as well as they would like at night, and they're not on treatment, that it could be a similar situation. And we do know for normal sleepers who are deprived of sleep experimentally that there are some changes in their metabolism, and it can make it harder to stay thin and lean. So this is really something that affects us in many ways beyond the obvious of inattentiveness or sleepiness. Now, there are lots of different types of sleep deprivation. I'm just going to summarize by saying continuous, good quality sleep is what we want to get to. Ideally, we would have all stages of sleep. We would have pretty good sleep night after night, and that's what we do when we treat someone with narcolepsy with medications. So now to talk about the home sleep environment. And this has gotten very little attention. And my belief is because most sleep doctors are very focused on measuring things, and they measure them in a sleep laboratory, that, thinking back to my patient where I'm just talking about, I thought I knew what was going on with him. It was sleep apnea, period. We could fix that with the CPAP machine. And it wasn't until his wife came in and said, well, wait a minute. What about my business and all those kids and the noise and the trampling, that I realized I'd probably missed an important part of this guy's problem. So I just want to sort of look at the different scenarios that might be applicable in some bedrooms, what they might mean, how serious they might be, and to the degree I can, what we might do about them. So one issue that's gotten quite a bit of attention is we almost all have some form of mobile technology. Boy, has life changed. No longer are our phones tethered and, limited to wherever we might have plugged them in. And so this is actually a very interesting data source done by the venerable Huffington Post. And what it does is just look at the age of people and where their phones sleep. And so the kind of bluish color is next to my bed in a place where I can easily reach it. And you can see that for all ages, but especially for younger people, the phone sleeps within reach at night. And that's an interesting question because then it brings up the issue of how might that matter. And in the case of a phone, it probably could matter for multiple different senses. To give you a sense, it can be bright, it can make noise, it can vibrate. So right off the bat, you've got vision, hearing, and touch. Hopefully it doesn't smell. So hopefully that's not an issue, but you never know where some phones may have been. I've had personally phones that have gone swimming, but they've never come back out functional. But that's another story for another time. When it comes to light, there are quite a few different things we need to keep in mind in a typical bedroom. The obvious ones are bedrooms have windows, and there can be light coming in those windows. It sort of depends what part of the country we're in, how much of a problem that is. In a more northerly place or an extremely southerly place in the southern hemisphere, in the summer months, the sun can come through the window late into the night. My hometown is Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I can tell you that if you want to see the stars, you have to stay up to about 1 a.m., and that means that if you want to sleep in a dark place, up to about midnight, you have to be pretty active to block out that light. And then, because of the wintertime in a place like Winnipeg, we long ago said we can't count on natural light. We're instead going to use artificial light. So what do? We have turned our houses into very brightly lit spots and brought in all sorts of artificial lights that also have an effect on our sleep. Then we have all our glowing screens, monitors, television sets, the list goes on and on. And then finally, and probably most significantly, are the little screens that we can pull, especially for someone like me who's quite short sighted, right up to the tip of my nose when I want to do something and I have my glasses off, very close to my eyes. And this is part of the problem, but I'll also foreshadow it's part of the solution. The intensity of light is very dependent on how close the light is to your eyes. And so this image kind of gets that point across. If I have my iPhone right here so that I can read it, that means the light that's emanating from it is very close to my retina and is going to have an alerting effect. Now here's the part of the solution. If I hold my iPhone, this would in my case require me wearing my glasses, at arm's length, the intensity of that light is diminished. It doesn't solve the problem, but I'm not sure we're going to have 100% solutions. It helps though. And I'm trying to be very practical. I personally think that all those mobile devices, no matter what I say and what others say, are still going to be sleeping on the bedside table within reach. I'm not sure that's going to change for most people. So let's at least talk about how we can reduce the impact and not have this scenario where this guy's like me, that phone's pretty close, and if he somehow could at least extend his arms, it would help. So how common a problem is this? How much research has been done? Well, it's clearly a hot topic because so many people have a cell phone. And so in 2011, our friends at the National Sleep Foundation found that almost all Americans had something electronic and sometimes used it close to bedtime. So this is pretty much a universal. You don't often see in medical research 95%. And the problem with this technology, although I think this too is getting improved, is that the light that comes from a mobile device tends to be in exactly the wrong wavelength to help a person fall asleep. Even though the light doesn't look blue, and the color on your screen doesn't mean that's the color of the light coming from the machine, although many Facebook, Facebook, for example, you think of Facebook, you think of the color blue, but the light that our devices shine is exactly the wrong type of light if you want to fall asleep at night. Now, it's the right kind of light for a person with delayed sleep phase who wants to wake up in the morning. And although nobody has researched this, and it probably isn't enough that you can bank on it, if a person has trouble waking up in the morning, to use a cell phone and hold it right to the end of your nose and read from it, that's probably going to maybe help a smidgen, but the opposite's true at bedtime. Now, why I wanted to say is things are getting better is that each new version of the software, each upgrade is being modified, and because of just how ubiquitous this problem is, at least the iPhone now has some options that allow you to minimize this. The phone isn't quite as bright if you use a particular option, and even the color of the light has been modified a bit. Why does light matter? Light matters because it has a very powerful effect on melatonin. Melatonin is something that helps all of us sleep when we want to. It controls the body clock. We want it at night. It's not present during the day, so it's not a matter of not wanting it during the day. But there's one catch. Melatonin is only secreted by the pineal gland if we are in the dark. So for this tracing, the red line is the melatonin rhythm. The black line is cortisol, which is not light sensitive, but is, as you can see, works in a counterbalancing fashion to the melatonin. If that person was to suddenly turn on the light in that blue square, the melatonin would quite quickly be suppressed. And so instead of having that very nice hump, they'd have half a hump or a quarter of a hump. And that just shows how light does make a difference for sleep. So, what are the solutions in the evening to protect yourself from sunlight? That does not apply in the morning. Then you actually may want to be out in the bright sunshine. To be careful about your exposure to artificial light in your home environment. So that's not the time to have, really bright ambient lighting. It might help you stay awake, but of course, at some point you want to go to sleep. And again, this may not apply quite so much to a narcolepsy patient you may be thinking, wait a minute, I can be in the brightest room possible and still fall asleep. And then you want to monitor your exposure to lights from our ubiquitous electronic devices and limit how much you use them right before you go to bed and hold them as far away as you can. So that may mean increasing the font, magnifying the image so it doesn't have to be as close. So now I'm going to move to the next sense, which is hearing. And I actually think that hearing is a more tricky problem than vision, and has gotten researched to a fair degree. So there are all sorts of noises in the home environment. First and foremost, and probably one of the most sensitive, requires real diplomacy, is if a person sleeps next to another person who happens to snore. Again, this may not be quite as problematic for a person with narcolepsy, but we don't only want you to fall asleep, we want you to stay asleep. Then for people who have young children or young grandchildren who are scared of the dark or sleepwalking or just like to snuggle, children can come. I know I remember clearly waking up and my young son wasn't climbing into bed, but he was standing right there telling me something. And I woke up and there was his little face right by the side of the bed. And whatever he had to tell me, he thought couldn't wait till morning. So it was the sound of him speaking to me that woke me up. I would like to think that I just sort of directed him back to bed and all was well. And I think that was the case. But you can imagine if that happens too much, people can start to get a little bit less patient and a little bit more reactive because of just the consequences for sleep. One of my pet projects, as I like to say, is to think about the implications of companion animals. And I'll show you some of the data that we have collected looking at that important topic that is completely neglected. I've already talked a little bit about the sounds that bedroom devices can produce. Some people, my 17-year-old son included, seems to think that he absolutely needs his device to beep whenever he gets a text, so he knows about it. And why he can't just silence the beep, he can't explain to me why that's impossible. I guess he needs to stay tuned in. But that means at night, if one of his friends who's further away or his sister who's 3 time zones away decides to contact him, the device beeps. And yes, he's clued in, he's connected, but I'm not sure it's so great for sleep. But I can't say that as a parent, I have helped him solve that one. The other things sort of depend on where you live and how much choice you have in where you live. One of my family members lives in Manhattan. She loves it, except you name it, sound-wise, it is there. And she doesn't have the luxury of a very fancy place, so there is a subway line not far away. There is certainly sirens. I can't believe they need that many sirens, but they certainly have them. You can have overhead airplanes, not so much in Manhattan, but in other places. You can have a railroad track where from time to time a big train goes by. Amazing how noisy they are. Now you may be wondering what a wing turbine is. Just change that to wind turbine. That's actually something that's gotten studied a fair amount for people whose homes are near some of these alternative energy sources where they have these enormous windmills. And of course, they're pretty noisy. And then this is now much more natural, much less modern. But in some places, the chirping birds or the sound of a rooster in the morning can definitely disturb sleep. And one thing about birds is they have an incredibly well-established circadian rhythm. So when that sun rises, and going back to Manitoba, a more northern place, if the sun is rising at 5 in the morning, the birds will wake up and they'll start doing their thing, and that can definitely cause noise in the right place. So here is just an example of how loud things can be. I hope that nobody sleeps in the gold, orange, or red range, has those things nearby. But just thinking of my family member in New York City, subway train, 100 decibels. Now, this is like light. The further away you are, the better it will be. But there are plenty of New York City apartments that are not very far away from a vent that would bring the sound up from beneath the street from the subway. And there certainly are people who live near noisy restaurants or whose companion is getting up and getting ready for work using a hair dryer while they're still trying to sleep. And you can see that there are a lot of things that happen in an ordinary household that count as far as being loud. And then before moving on, we'll just point to the light green box that moderate snoring is 40 decibels. In our sleep laboratory, we measure snoring with one of our home sleep apnea devices, and it's not uncommon for that device to register snoring in the 80 decibel range for someone with more severe sleep apnea. So there we're getting into the loud radio bass drum range. And that's just a person sleeping in their own bed. So moving away from sound, now to smell. And this is one we don't normally think about at night. And if anything, this may be one that we can harness a little bit more and isn't so much of an issue. But I'll tell you a story from when I was a resident working in a hospital. I, of course, worked nights, and I was in a Veterans Affairs hospital, and they must have had the most energetic cleaning crew imaginable because there was a small bedroom available for the doctor on call to sleep in. Well, they selected some incredibly pungent citrus something or another, and I'm sure there wasn't one speck of dirt in that entire room, but I actually couldn't sleep because it was just so smelly. Not in a negative way, and it was all meant to be clean. I suppose it smelled clean, but I've never slept in a place quite as smelly, and that may have made their life easier because if none of the residents slept in that room, it wasn't hard to keep it clean. But it just shows how sometimes you can't control where you sleep. We're all in hotels right now. Most hotels are very careful to have pleasant smells, but when you can't choose where you sleep, sometimes strong smells happen. And it's not always a cleaning product. Sometimes there's a garbage can outside the window or something much less pleasant. Then this is a little bit of a stretch, but for people who are outside, may enjoy the aroma of blooming plants, the pollen of blooming plants, the smell and the pollen can haunt them at night. And so they sort of bring in the inflammation that starts because they're outside into their bedroom and they have allergies and congestion that makes it really hard, again, for a narcolepsy patient, not so much to fall asleep, but to stay asleep. Another one that hasn't gotten much attention, beyond maybe the pillow and mattress people, is the issue of touch. But we do know some about this. We know for a healthy, normal sleeper that room temperature matters. And although you don't want extremes, in general, if you have to choose between hot or cold, from a sleep standpoint, take cold. When we are hotter, some of the signals in the brain that allow us to fall asleep can be interrupted. And of course, if we're really hot, you can start to sweat, and you can then perspire and end up shivering. And this is not only based on the air temperature, but anyone who's had hot flashes will have had this just due to the internal body temperature and the faulty regulation at that stage of life. There is a whole industry that will happily take your money to sell you the perfect mattress. And depending on where you are or where you live, mattresses are made of different materials. In Japan, they rely on futons. Sometimes there are straw mattresses, feather mattresses, foam mattresses. And this is all about touch and comfort. I'm not really here to talk much about mattresses. Other people know more about this. I would just say find one that suits you and have modest expectations. No mattress is going to take away major problems. My daycare guy could have the most magnificent mattress, and it's not going to help him with that daycare situation. But also be aware of the age of your mattress. So some of us are a little bit thrifty, bought a bed, hope to keep it for the rest of my life. Well, mattresses do change when you use them every night. And so sometimes they need to be replaced because they are no longer as good as they once were. There's some interesting research, and I'm going to really sound like the mother of teenagers and young adults, that making one's bed helps. But somebody actually researched that. And they found it's not so much the making of the bed, it's when you come to your bed at night and you see a neatly made bed that you're sort of in the right frame of mind to get into bed and fall asleep. And the only way your bed, at least at my house, the only way my bed's going to be made is if I make it at some point, ideally, might as well make it early in the day. But interestingly, somebody actually did a research study and said that walking in and sort of having the positive reaction of a bed that is neatly put together was helpful. And I assume, well, I don't need research for this, I just go visit my kid's bedroom, that a bed that's covered with everything known to man, where you have to sort of dig a bit to find the bed, that's probably not sort of the right introduction to get into bed. Again, how much that matters for someone with narcolepsy who might just get on top of all that stuff and sleep, I appreciate. People can be very picky, and they need to be, about what they wear and what they have on their bed. We've probably all had the experience, maybe at summer camp or other places, where the bedding is scratchy or the soap that's been used is something that we react to, so we wind up itching partway through the night. I personally am a real fan of, soft, maybe not silky, but soft bedding that I just think helps me relax and fall asleep. Um, Vibration's another issue for touch. Doesn't come up too often in a person who lives in their own home, unless you have the misfortune of sort of major equipment. The design of your home was really unfortunate. But in many apartment or hotel situations, there can be an elevator shaft or the heating and cooling system. And hopefully no one finds themselves living in that situation, but it sometimes does happen. Then another one that requires a lot of diplomacy, and some of the people in this room may actually be the source of restlessness for their bed partner, and hopefully no one is restless themselves and their bed partner is restless, so you're like, competing to see who's the most restless. But that can be a pretty rough thing from a good night's sleep. Now, last but not least, and this is, I think, quite relevant to people with narcolepsy, especially those on Xyrem, are taste. When you have a bad taste in your mouth and you're trying to fall asleep, that's tough. And for people taking Xyrem, that's one of the issues, that our medicine doesn't taste so great. And it's not just Xyrem. There are other medicines as well. Another sleeping medicine is Lunesta or azopiclone. The way it works on the brain chemistry often causes a bit of a metallic flavor, and no amount of toothbrushing in the morning or after a person takes the medicine takes that away, because it's really sort of a perception that's more deeply embedded. It's not really about something in a person's mouth. And I know all of you will have come up with strategies, or at least I hope you have, to help you with your Xyrem taste issue. But that's a real issue. Again, most people with narcolepsy, after they've taken Xyrem especially, can fall asleep. But when you wake up, you may still taste that to some degree. Heartburn can be a nasty acidic thing. And then some people have dental issues that just mean that they have sort of an unpleasant situation in their mouth that can make it hard to relax and fall asleep. So now I'm going to move to my pet project. Where do our pets sleep? And of course, 150 years ago, pets didn't really exist for most people. I suppose the very wealthy might have a lap dog. But in the last 100 years, our animals are much less likely to be herding the sheep or protecting us. They're much more likely to be in our home, and we're much less likely to be in our home during the day. We're off doing things, working, going to school. So when we get home, we want to spend time with our precious animal. So we want to have them near us, not only when we're awake, but for many people, we want them near us at night. And there have been a couple of studies, some of them that I and my colleagues have done. Some have been done by the National Sleep Foundation, and one was done by the Pet Products Association, just simply asking, do you have a pet? Okay, about half of Americans do. And if so, where does that pet sleep? And for almost half of pets, they can sleep wherever they like, or they're even welcomed into the bedroom. And some pets wouldn't have it any other way. So I think a dog you can sort of train to sleep wherever wherever you want it. And after a while, if you're really disciplined, the dog can learn to sleep someplace else. Good luck with a cat. If that cat decides that it wants to be in your room, you can try banishing it. Maybe you have a big enough house that you can put it a long way away. But it's amazing how loud a cat can be. And a cat standing outside a bedroom door can certainly let you know that they're not happy to be there. So cats and dogs are very frequently in the bedroom. So one thing we did was a research study. We'd long ago asked people, and you get sort of a whole variety of responses. And I think to some degree, those of us who own pets are all pretty loyal to our pets. And, even if my pet bothers me a bit at night, it's worth it. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. I suppose some people may be a little more disciplined than I, and their pet never is in the bedroom. But I wanted to see more objective data. So we used a Fitbit on both the pet and the person, and we got 40 people whose pet was allowed somewhere in the bedroom to wear this device for a week and to have it on their animal as well. And we had the people fill out a sleep diary. We weren't able to get sleep diaries from the pets. And we excluded people with special circumstances. So this was done in healthy sleepers. So people with a sleep disorder like narcolepsy weren't able to be in this study, although sometime I would love to do the narcolepsy version of this. And we excluded people who had puppies, who had more than one pet. One person I met had 13 pets in the bedroom, cats and dogs. I can't imagine it. I don't think the bedroom was that big. I think that's indicative of other issues. Leave that be. We did this at the hospital I work at, where about 85% of our staff are women. I obviously am a woman researcher, so anyway, this turned out to be a very woman-oriented study. Kind of nice to have some variety there. And we had all sorts of breeds of dogs. We had quite a few Chihuahuas, but we also had a Great Dane, we had German Shepherds, and so we took whatever, and we plotted that data based on dog weight. So we were looking at how big is the dog. We asked people, was your dog, as far as you know, never on the bed, or was it sometimes on the bed? How big was your bed? Did you have a bed partner? And we're still looking at some of this data. But this is what we had the humans wear, an ActiWatch, which is a medical grade Fitbit. And this is what we had the dog wear. And this is about this is a small device that goes on the dog collar. And other animal researchers have, who are looking at research animals in a laboratory setting, have long ago determined that the neck is the best place for a dog to wear the monitor. We did not study cats. I would love to study cats someday, but we had to start somewhere, so we started with dogs. And the dog wears that device. And then this device, which is called a FitBark, and we bought them from the FitBark company, and they have a website, actually has a Wi-Fi connection. So when you put the monitor and your iPhone together and you download their app, this is what shows up on the app. Now, we asked the people in the study to not download the app till it was over, but this is what the FitBark data looks like. And so this is just, the dog wore it for 2 nights, Wednesday and then mostly Thursday. And so you can see that the company has some cutoffs. And so the green would be what the company feels is sleep. You can see what the company feels is active, which is blue. And then, although this poor dog, and I think this actually happens to be my poor dog, doesn't get a whole lot of playtime, that would be when my husband took our dog for a walk. And boy, that doesn't show up on there at all. Our dog is really loved, even though this may not show it. But you can see how our dog is active at the before we go to work, and then after we get home, and then sleeps really well, based on this monitor, because there's a whole not much activity at all. You can sort of see when we go to bed, there's a little bit of activity, but this is a dog that sleeps surprisingly well. And to my knowledge, there's never been any research of dogs in a home environment using anything like this. So what did we find? And we're still looking at this in several different ways. But we found that the humans had a sleep efficiency of 81%. And it wasn't much different if the dog was on or off the bed, and it wasn't much different if the dog was big or small. And in a community dwelling group of adults of the same age with no pets, sleep efficiency with the same device is 81%. So even though I'm talking about, problems in the bedroom, at least based on this, I actually am beginning to wonder whether pets may not be, well, dogs. Let's put cats in a separate category because of that, herding cats problem. But dogs who kind of know and can learn may not be that big a deal. Now, in case you're wondering what the dog sleep efficiency was, and there's absolutely no data I can compare this to as to whether this was high, low, or normal, their sleep efficiency was 85%. So what we're doing now, which is a pretty laborious thing, is we're going through minute by minute to see, which can tell us, because the devices collect the data in 1 minute long intervals. So who goes to bed first? And actually, we're only partly through our data analysis, but I'll ask you, who do you think stops moving, i.e., presumably falls asleep first, the dogs or the people? 100% of the time so far, it's been the dogs. And I think what happens is they notice that their owner is brushing their teeth and getting into special clothes. Dogs figure out patterns, and they see the lights being turned off in the house, and they realize, now this is assuming that they are a well-behaved dog, that they should lie down. And whether that be on the bed or on the floor, that they figure that out. Now, in the morning, it's not quite as consistent. It seems that about 80% of the time, the person gets up first and the dog gets up second. And then 20% of the time, it's the reverse. And I actually think that one explanation there is both dogs and people get up because they have to go to the bathroom. So whoever is more, so dogs have other signals at that time of day. So that's not so much about learning something other than learning to not make a mess in the house and wanting attention to be let out. So what we're doing now is we're looking during the night at who sleeps, so who wakes up, who moves, and who moves first and how long they move for. And so when we're just looking at people who sleep alone, so we don't have another human in the bed on that one, because then that completely adds another wild card there. So we're looking at single people with a single dog, and we're going to compare the dogs on the bed to the dogs off the bed to see if that makes a difference, because it might. And then we'll look at big dogs versus small dogs. And this is more technical, but this is just looking at, you can see there is a spread. So although the average isn't too bad, there are certainly some people that have trouble, and they may not be as good a sleeper. They may be more aware of anything in their bedroom, whether it be light, sound, pets, smell. And some people can sleep through anything, so the fact they have a Great Dane sleeping on their feet doesn't bother them. These are some of the principles we just ask people to think about if they want to have a pet in the bedroom. And as I see more service animals for people with narcolepsy, I think that this does apply. I personally think that therapy dogs and service animals can be a very important part of a management plan. But I do think that some thought has to be given as to where will the service dog, therapy dog, or companion dog sleep. And so the questions to ask is, how well does the pet owner sleep? And how well does the bed partner of the pet, the human bed partner of the pet owner sleep? Is the pet clean and smell, not smelly? My dog, every once in a while, finds something, and I can tell you is not welcome in the bedroom until that something's been cleaned off. Does the human have any allergies to pets? How large is the bedroom? How large is the bed? How well does the pet sleep? We all know that some dogs have flat faces. These are generally pugs and bulldogs. They can snore. Some dogs have a lot of REM sleep. As you know, dogs are not paralyzed in REM sleep, so they can yip and they can move their paws, move their whiskers. If that's a big deal for a certain dog, that may not be a good one to have nearby. How many pets? I do not think more is better when it comes to pets in the bedroom. Where does the pet sleep? Some people have their pet, it's a little more cats, but there are some dogs, literally sleep on their pillow with their head on the pillow and their body lengthwise. That's probably asking for trouble. Does excluding the pet work? Hopefully it does if that's what you want to do, but as I mentioned, some cats will not hear of that and will let you know that that's entirely unsatisfactory. Some dogs will do as well if they've gotten accustomed to something and they're not wanting to learn new ways. Does the pet have any special needs? This actually may mean the pet ought to be more close. If the pet actually needs to be let out because it's an aging pet, male dogs can have large prostates and need and have voiding needs that change as they age. Sometimes pets need medications at night, so that may actually mean the pet should be closer. And then if the decision is made that the pet works, I personally think that having a pet nearby for some people can be a good thing. It can, especially people who sleep alone. And some stories I hear, a spouse has a job with a lot of night work. They might be in the fire department. They're gone a fair amount. The dog is welcome in the bedroom when the spouse is gone, and that helps the person relax and fall asleep because they feel they have some more protection nearby, and the pet would bark if something were to happen. And then for some people, having a pet nearby, a purring cat, helps them relax. You only get into the bonus points round, though, if none of the other issues are present. But I do think that for some people, there is the possibility of a pet being beneficial. I'm not sure this is the best example. She seems to be sleeping well, and the pet doesn't seem to be sleeping. But who knows? Maybe, some cats can be amazingly quiet as they walk around. And of course, cats are a little bit more nocturnal, which is why I want to sort of do the cat version of this just to see. I don't think a cat is going to be quite as still at night as the typical dog, but we'll see. So what are some of the solutions? I've already spoken to some of these, but I just wanted to reiterate the important points. Be very careful about light. Grow as long an arm as you possibly can for the sake of your mobile device. Watch how long you're doing something close to bedtime. Do all you can to keep your bedroom quiet. That may mean sending your snoring human bed partner off to a sleep lab or until he or she agrees off to a spare bedroom. Be very careful to the degree you can control it about equipment and devices. Thankfully, children grow up, so hopefully once they are out of their toddler years, they're not going to be standing by your bed asking you questions. They'll learn that there's a time and that middle of the night is not the time. Pets, take a very honest assessment what's going on. It may work, it may not work. And then if you are in a noisy place, if you can, soundproof. And I understand that in New York City, there's actually a whole profession of audio engineers who will go into people's homes at night with decibel readers, determine how loud the traffic or noise is, and then soundproof. Now, this is people clearly in a pretty high income bracket, but can help them change their insulation, change the materials to try and fend off the sound. And frankly, most sleep labs have done that because they, by but not surprisingly, have snoring people come. And the last thing they want is for the next door person in the sleep lab to hear the person in the adjacent room. So most sleep labs have been very careful about insulation. For smell, well, unless you have the misfortune to work at a hospital where you have an assigned room and someone else cleans it, change your ways. Don't on a night that your dog has just gone for a swim in the creek, that's not a night for the dog to be in the bedroom as much about smell as it is about wet. If you've got noisy neighbors, well, good luck with that. Um, that's not an easy one. And then someone else did an interesting study where they kind of compared sheets that were just ordinary sheets and ones that were freshly cleaned with a nice, now assuming someone doesn't have a soap allergy, a nicely fragranted cleaning product, and actually said that people slept better. So it's a small thing, but clean sheets with a nice fragrance may help you sleep better. We've known for years that some people will pursue aromatherapy, and for sleep, particularly lavender, to try and help them relax and fall asleep. I'm not sure how well that works, but it probably doesn't harm a person unless they find the smell of lavender to be obnoxious. And then for touch, try watch your room temperature if you have the opportunity to control it, which may not be the case for me. I live in Arizona now. If I wanted to keep my room temperature at 65 degrees all summer long, I would be a much poorer person to show for it. So we don't do that. But when you can control it, keep it as cool as you can. So for those of you who have the heat on in the wintertime, don't overdo that. Shop around for a mattress that you like. You don't have to spend a king's ransom. Replace it periodically. Find fabrics you like. It's worth the extra effort. If you have vibrations, fight back to whatever degree you can to cancel them out. That's getting pretty sophisticated, although it does apply for sound. We all know now about sound canceling headphones where sound is coming at us, and these headphones have an active component. That's why they have a battery that actually blocks the sound by canceling out the waves. This probably almost belongs in the sound section more than the touch section. And then for restless bed partners, well, good luck. I know that when you love your bed partner, sleeping apart is tough, and getting a person to seek help is tough. But see if you can make that work. And then for taste, so this is very pertinent to those of you on Xyrem, do what you can to problem solve. Some people who take Xyrem will have just a single animal cracker to soak up the salty flavor so it's not so much in their mouth as they fall asleep. Others will mix in something like Crystal Light so that they mask the flavor, and they claim it works. Not everyone finds that works, but some people use that to try and help them sleep without so much difficulty. Just in general, when it comes to controlling your lifestyle, improving your sleep, and this probably does not apply as much to people with narcolepsy, where a cup of coffee doesn't phase you. But just still, don't throw a wild card unnecessarily into the mix. Don't work out right before you go to bed. That will raise your body temperature, and even though you may be in a cool room, if your body's hot, it will take a while to cool down. I've already talked about electronics. Try to turn your mind off and have a nice, comfortable bedtime. And for people with narcolepsy, I realize that some of these things you may almost want to use to stay awake. And we actually talk about exercise to help a person stay awake during the day. So this may not work as well as at night. But my goal is to harness all the things that we can to help everyone sleep better, whether you have narcolepsy or whether you're on Xyrem or not.